Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Johnson Financial Group, helping customers build financial plans around their unique goals for over 55 years. More at johnsonfinancialgroup.com. Johnson Bank and Johnson Wealth, Inc. are Johnson Financial Group companies.
From Appoint Productions and WUWM, this is Classic Eats. For this episode of Classic Eats, I reconnect with Adrian Miller, the soul food scholar. Miller is the author of 5 books on culinary history, from presidential cooks and chefs to barbecue. He has won the James Beard Award twice for his scholarship and travels widely speaking on culinary history. It's Black Chefs in the White House and a dinner menu where politics, deliciousness, and history come together. But first, a story. It is 1942 and you are in your last semester at Wiley College in Marshall, Texas. A young woman with a home economics degree nearly in hand, a mind for cooking and no particular plan for what comes next. Then a woman named Lady Bird Johnson comes to campus looking for a cook, and the college president recommends you. You are 28 years old. You do not know that you will spend the next 27 years feeding the most consuming, demanding, charismatic, infuriating man in American political life. You do not know that you will cook your way into the center of American history. You just know the job sounds steady, and you say yes. His name is Lyndon Baines Johnson, the congressman from Texas, and steady is not a word anyone in his orbit would use. He arrives home at 9 o'clock expecting dinner for 12. He invites the entire cabinet on 30 minutes' notice. He submits to a doctor-ordered low-fat diet after a massive heart attack, then ignores it, and you are the one charged with keeping him alive while keeping him happy, which are not always the same assignment. You write him a note. It says more or less, you are going to eat what I put in front of you, and you are not going to complain. Johnson keeps the note in his pocket. He pulls it out at a cocktail party to show Senator Fulbright, who has accused him of an arrogance of power. If my own cook talks to me like this, he says, how arrogant can I be? He does not stop complaining about the food, but he eats it. The drive from Texas to Washington is where the other story lives, the one that doesn't make the dinner party circuit. You and your husband, Sammy, make that drive with the Johnson family for years through the American South in the age of Jim Crow. The Johnsons stop at restaurants. You cannot enter. They use a restroom at filling stations. You squat behind a bush at the side of the road. At night, Sammy sleeps in the front seat with the steering wheel pressed against him, and you sleep in the back. Eventually, you stop making the trip at all. You simply will not do it anymore. And when Lyndon Johnson needs to find the words to move a reluctant Congress towards the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he uses yours. He tells them about his cook, the cook for the President of the United States, and what she endures on a public highway in her own country. It is not an abstraction for him. It is his Zephyr. It is the road between Texas and Washington. It is the millionth in dignity on the side of the road. When Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act on July 2, 1964, he uses dozens of pens, handing them out to the lawmakers and dignitaries assembled in the East Room. He saves one for you. You deserve this, he says, more than anybody else. Zephyr Wright was not a firebrand. She was not an activist in the traditional sense. She stayed home during the March on Washington and watched it on television. But she fed the most powerful man in the world, and her cooking was beloved equally by bigoted Southern lawmakers and civil rights champions, who found themselves sitting side by side at Johnson's table. He put them there shrewdly, and he let her food do its quiet work. In a way, she changed the law of the land, but she had already been changing minds, one plate at a time. Welcome to Classic Eats. I'm Kyle Johnson Cherek. This is a show about culinary history, why we eat what we eat, the people, the places, the scenes and situations that set the course for the way we dine. Each show we pick a thing, a person, a drink, a movement, or an object that made its mark on what we call food. Today, I'm reconnecting with author Adrian Miller. We're talking about the 2+ centuries of the unsung African-American chefs who cooked for American presidents. Well, how would you describe the topic of your book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet?
I would say it's the first collective biography of African Americans who have been in presidential food service ever since George Washington. So every president of the United States has had an African American cook for them in some capacity. So that's why I say presidential food service, because aside from the White House itself, there's other ways that food shows up for our presidents.
Mm-hmm. And as I, that was beautiful, thank you. And as I worked my way through American culinary history, I kept bumping into, and this was many years ago, how many unsung, unnoted, unrecorded, unmentioned African Americans were cooking in our nation's house. Yeah. And that all of the unsungness just was a drastic travesty. And I knew about James Hemings, but then for just a topographical pursuit, then the trail runs cold until I run into your book, which really opened my eyes.
So one is Hercules. Hercules was the enslaved chef for George Washington, and he was tapped from the Mount Vernon kitchen as a teenager. I got to stop you.
He didn't just have, because he has one of the coolest names ever. He wasn't like Madonna or Cher or Jesus. He had two names. Hercules is a great place to start, though.
Yeah, because when we get to the full name, that kind of rounds out the story.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's tapped, he trained at Mount Vernon under an elderly black woman who's also enslaved named Old Doll. So she was kind of the head cook at Mount Vernon. So Hercules, the first cook that Washington hired, a woman named Mrs. Reed, for whatever reason, she didn't work out. And so Washington has Hercules come up to be his cook. The problem is that the nation's capital was in Philadelphia at that time because they were building D.C. And Pennsylvania had something called the Gradual Abolition Act of 1780, which said if you were an enslaved person on Pennsylvania soil longer than 6 months, you're automatically free. So what Washington did to get around this is every 6 months he would take his enslaved people out of Pennsylvania for like a week or so and then bring them back to start the clock over.
So can we just stop right the F there?
Yeah,
Our nation's president, who fought for the independence of man, would work the system to keep people enslaved and coordinate a big ass household to move I don't know how many miles to the state border and back.
Yep.
Just for free labor and to keep people in suffragage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm really patriotic and I adore my country, and I know you do too, but that crap just turns a person's stomach.
Likewise.
Okay.
And people don't
go on.
And people just don't know these stories. Fast forward, end of Washington's presidency, Hercules had his son Richmond as kind of the assistant cook. They called them scullions back then. And so Washington catches Richmond with a satchel full of money, which he believed was going to fund an escape attempt. He confronted Hercules. Hercules denied it, but Washington didn't believe him. So he sent him back to Mount Vernon, not to the kitchen, but had him out in the fields doing hard labor. This cook that had nourished him for years, people wrote about this guy in their diaries. They loved his food. And so on Washington's 65th birthday, he manages to escape because there were all these birthday preparations happening at Mount Vernon, so people were distracted.
Hercules manages to escape,
So he manages to escape. He eventually makes his way to New York City, and then he takes on the last name of his previous owner, a guy named James Posey. And so he's a chef in New York City known as Hercules Posey, and he's there until the year 1812 when he dies of tuberculosis. They called it consumption back then, but tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Next person I want to talk about is James Hemings. We mentioned him already. One of the older brothers of Sally Hemings. He was, as a teenager, brought to France when Thomas Jefferson was minister to France, and this is before the French Revolution.
Right.
And Jefferson has him trained as a classical French chef, so he pays for this for 3 years.
He's the first American French chef. There's no equivocation there. And I think he's probably the chef in this story that most people might be familiar with.
I think so. He has him classically trained, and then he becomes Jefferson's chef at his Champs-Élysées Paris apartment. So the other interesting thing is, under French law, Hemmings could have sued as a third party could have sued for Hemmings' freedom. And so what is generally understood by historians is that essentially Jefferson paid him off. So he paid him a salary comparable to what a French chef got at that time. So this is an enslaved black man from Virginia in another country doing it. So then we fast forward, and then at some point, Hemmings wants to be free. And so he approaches...
Like you do.
Yeah. Like most people want to be free, right? Yeah. So he approaches Jefferson and says, I want to be free. And Jefferson agrees upon two conditions. One, Hemmings has to teach everybody else at Monticello how to cook. Because, Jefferson doesn't want to pay for all that culinary training again. And two, he had to leave behind his recipes. So Hemmings does this. He goes out on his own. But unfortunately, he ends up drinking himself to death at a very young age. He was only 36.
Yeah. It just these are the evidences of systemic trauma.
Right, exactly, ongoing. I'm personally convinced that Hemmings would have been Jefferson's White House chef had he stayed alive. I think Jefferson would have definitely asked him to be that. Whether he would have said yes or not, I don't know. So let's fast forward after emancipation. Well, another person I love to talk about is Laura Dolly Johnson. So a young Theodore Roosevelt is traveling in the South. He's in Lexington, Kentucky. He goes to the house of a guy named Colonel John Mason Brown, has a wonderful meal cooked by Dolly Johnson, who was the private cook for Colonel Brown. And Roosevelt is so impressed that he telegraphs the White House to the newly elected Benjamin Harrison and says, you got to have this woman as your cook. And they end up hiring her. She was reluctant at first. She really didn't want to leave Lexington, but, a lot of people twisted her arm. So
it's a big job and a big step. I mean, yeah.
So there were newspaper headlines all across the nation about her hire. But this was news to the woman who was already in the position, a woman named Madame Peylunar, who was a French woman who was cooking for the British Embassy before she comes to work for the White House. So, Madame Peylunar was so upset about this that she actually filed a lawsuit against the president for dismissing her. So this is the first known lawsuit by a White House employee against the president. Dolly Johnson goes to the White House. She's there only for 8 months because her daughter got sick in Lexington. So she comes back to Lexington. But then when Grover Cleveland beats Harrison, he talks her into coming back. And she spends 4 years there. That shows you how much game she had. And then in 1894-95, she comes back to Lexington and opens a restaurant and puts ads in the newspaper touting herself as a White House cook. I mean, this is a black woman, in the 1890s in Lexington, Kentucky, leveraging her fame. I just think it's awesome.
Yeah. If you were just joining us, I'm talking to food writer Adrian Miller, and we are discussing some poignant moments from his book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet.
Another person I want to talk about is somebody who's outside the White House, and her name is Daisy Bonner. This is with another Roosevelt, so this is with Franklin Roosevelt. So Franklin Roosevelt had polio, and he would go to Warm Springs, Georgia to get treatments. And this Warm Springs, Georgia was a famous place for people with ailments to come and just bathe in the natural hot
But it was
springs.
like the second White House for him, correct?
Yeah, he spent so much time there.
Yeah.
And so this wealthy white family, to ingratiate themselves with FDR, would loan their black cook to him, and that was Daisy Bonner. And so she got him hooked on all kinds of stuff, like pig's feet, all kinds of Southern delicacies. And one of the funny
do I
things...
remember from your book, sorry to interrupt you, that is it true that Churchill came and had pig's feet? FDR essentially served, Daisy Bonner served pig's feet to Churchill. I mean, that image is so, God, it's good. This fat man who's just a brute with his cigar eating pig's feet, I love it.
Yep. So Daisy Bonner didn't serve those pig's feet. He actually had them in the White House, and they were sweet and sour pig's feet, which was a recipe from the Princess of Norway.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But Churchill was not feeling it at all. That's one of the funniest food stories, I think, involving really famous figures in White House history. Yeah. So there's a tragic end. You probably have seen that famous unfinished portrait of FDR. So he was in Warm Springs, sitting for that portrait, and that they took a break for lunch. And the lunch was Daisy Bonner was going to serve a souffle, a cheese souffle, which is something that FDR loved, and it was scheduled to be served at 1:15, but he had his fatal cerebral hemorrhage at 1:12, so he never gets sold that. Now, Kyle, this is a culinary miracle that I'm about to share. Daisy Bonner said that souffle did not fall for 2 hours until he was officially pronounced dead. Anybody who's cooked a souffle, that's just a miracle.
That just doesn't. That's once in a lifetime. Never happens.
Yeah, but she was so moved by his death that she went to the kitchen where she worked and she wrote on the wall, "Daisy Bonner cooked first and last meal for President Roosevelt." And that is still to this day. They covered it up with plastic to preserve it. It is still on the wall to this day if you go to the Warm Springs cottage where she worked and lived. The last person I'll mention is Zephyr Wright, who was the longtime cook for Lyndon Johnson.
Oh yeah, incredibly. I mean, talk about a cornerstone in American history in the quiet, unassuming way.
Yep. Yeah. So a lot of people ascribe Lyndon Johnson's rise in Congress to her cooking, because I'm gonna share something that's gonna sound like a fairy tale.
Oh, this I haven't heard.
Once upon a time, members of Congress would get together and have each other over for dinner and get to know each other and socialize, because they realize that they're battling in Congress, but really it's about relationships and it's for the best, all of that stuff. So nobody.
Well, and that was part of Johnson's power, was he knew everybody's personalities so well, so he could cower over them and cajole and Yep.
So very few people passed up her fried chicken, her hash, and her peach cobbler and her popovers. Those were some of the things that she was known for. But notably, the family would drive from Central Texas, where the Johnson Ranch was, to Washington D.C. and Zephyr Wright suffered so many indignities going through the Jim Crow South, being denied bathroom privileges, being denied eating with the family, that she stayed in D.C.
She was traveling with the president, though.
He was a congressman at that point. So this was before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so she suffered so many indignities that she stayed in Washington, D.C. year-round. So when Johnson becomes president, he actually uses anecdotes from her experiences under Jim Crow to marshal support for the bill. And when he signed the bill, they signed with 70 pens or whatever. He gave one of those pens to her and said, "You deserve this as much as anyone."
So I'm going to, that's, first of all, that's so cool. But the thought that I had was, it's one thing to pull another senator or congressperson that you've been serving with and now you're president aside, or take a meeting, have a breakfast, have a lunch, and say, we got to pass this civil rights stuff. We got to change this. It's another thing to say the lady that suffered these indignities makes some of your favorite meals. Basically, is the locus of the hospitality that you've received and, quite frankly, asked me to be party to again because it was so good. I mean, food is so interesting to me because it's so quotidian, right? It's just, sometimes it's just nourishment. And then it's so sacred. It's these moments that connect everything.
Yeah. And then she provided one of the most controversial moments of his presidency in a fun way. Nothing like Vietnam and other stuff was going on. But in 1964, the White House released a Texas chili recipe. And if you know anything about Texas chili, it doesn't have beans. And so when this recipe came out, the nation was scandalized because most people want beans in their chili.
Sure.
And so one of my biggest research finds is I went to the LBJ library. So I'm listening to all the audio tapes from the Vietnam War era, really serious, heavy stuff. I find this roughly 2-minute clip of Zephyr Wright talking to Juanita Roberts, who was the social secretary, talking about how to strategize and let the nation know what beans LBJ liked. And so I include the transcript for that in my book. It's really hilarious. The final thing I'll say is that in her memoir, Lady Bird Johnson wrote that the recipe card that they put out to the public was the second most requested document from the federal government in 1964. The only thing people wanted to know more about was the newly created Women and Children Nutrition Program.
Again, food related.
Yep. So it shows you the power of these recipes.
You may or may not know this little quip of history, but so the Kennedys, as you said, really, Jackie Kennedy brings a French chef, René Verdun, into the White House. One of the chefs that she got to know on the Upper East Side restaurants of New York, the Lays and the Laws, that are part of that experience. And then Jack Kennedy is tragically killed, and LBJ ascends to the presidency. And he keeps Verdun for a while, but he cannot stand his food, right? This ossified, rarefied, French food. And the thing that really broke the camel's back was the fava beans that Verdun tried to serve to LBJ, and he was like, I can't do it anymore. This guy's got to go.
Yep. And look,
so beans coming and going.
Yep. The animosity was mutual because Verdun did not like Tex-Mex. He called it chili concrete instead of chili con carne.
So there's a lot of levity in these stories, but there's also, I don't want to dwell on it, but we got to give it its due. There's a dark, tragic aspect to all of this. There's people that have been, whose contributions, again, feeding luminaries and dignitaries and politicians in the nation's house who have been completely pushed to the side most of the history.
Right, because we tend to just kind of overlook the fact that a lot of our early presidents were enslavers, the ones from the South. And so before you get to the Truman administration, presidents had to pay for their own staff in the residence and for their own food. So it made sense if you were an enslaver or a wealthy person to bring your own personal staff with you to the White House rather than hiring on the free labor market.
Sure.
So even in that setting, which people would say, oh, it's kind of exciting and glamour stuff, they were still enslaved. Two women that I did not mention, Frances Gillette Hearn and Edith Fawcett, were the two assistant chefs for Jefferson under a French chef named Honoré Julien. So these two women cooked for him for, roughly 6 years or so during his White House stint. And then when he goes into retirement, they cook for him for the rest of his life. At Monticello, these two black women.
Yeah.
And there's just tragic stories of them trying to be with their families, relatives getting sold and things like that. So, yeah, there is a really heartbreaking underside to all of this, despite the glow of the presidency and the allure of the presidency. When given a choice, a lot of these people chose freedom.
That's our show. Thanks for taking a seat at our table for this episode of Classic Eats. Would you please?
Listen, I'm here for it. Let's go.
Okay.
In 5, 4, 3.
Now I've got the giggles.
Classic Eats is created and hosted by Kyle Johnson Cherek and co-produced by Apuan Productions and WUWM.
Executive producers Kyle Johnson Cherek and Rob Schoonover. Audio editing and engineering by Brian Arkta and John Rymaszewski.
Special thanks again to our guest, Adrian Miller. You can hear this episode again and any others you've missed when you subscribe to Classic Eats, found wherever you listen to your podcasts.